The air inside Willow's grill offered little relief from the oppressive heat outside. The AC had been struggling since Monday, a problem management hadn't addressed. Staff endured it. Damp necks, glistening foreheads, and the constant hum of customer complaints over sweet tea. It was the kind of late June heat that frayed nerves and made tempers simmer. Tiana Baines had been navigating the lunch rush since 10:45 a.m., moving with practiced efficiency. She took orders, refilled drinks, and cleared tables, speaking only when necessary. Most regulars had learned not to engage in small talk. Tiana was polite but offered no more than her job required. Today, however, she'd made one concession to the sweltering conditions. Her sleeves were rolled up. This was unusual. Her stiff, pale blue uniform blouse, with her name stitched above the pocket, was always buttoned and cuffed, regardless of the heat or how sticky her skin felt by noon. But today the heat had finally won. Her forearms were exposed, just enough for anyone truly looking to see the unblemished, scarred tissue that ascended her left arm before disappearing under her sleeve. Table 3, the booth by the window, was occupied by 4 men in their early 30s. They wore jeans and matching t-shirts from a local roofing company, their boots scuffed, ball caps stained, and fingers thick with calluses. Off-duty and boisterous, they were the type who told jokes half the restaurant didn't want to hear but laughed at anyway. Tiana approached with her notepad. The man on the end, blond with a crooked smile and mirrored shades perched on his head, didn't respond immediately. He was staring at her arm, a smirk playing on his lips. "You burn yourself on a curling iron or something?" he quipped. His friend snorted. "Nah bro, that's from catching hands." "Y'all Wilden," another added. "That's breakup damage for sure." The fourth man simply shook his head, chuckling into his iced tea. Poor guy. Tiana remained impassive. Her face didn't betray emotion, nor did her posture. She simply jotted down their orders. 2 cheeseburgers, chicken tenders, and a request for extra fries. Her pen never faltered, her eyes didn't flinch. Yet something behind them hardened, not anger, not pain, but a solid resolve, like a door quietly closing. She walked away without a word. At the counter, old Benny, the cook, watched her return to the kitchen. "You could?" he asked, wiping his brow with a dish rag. "Yeah. You sure?" Heard him say something. "It's fine." Benny nodded once and turned back to the flat top. Tiana grabbed the next ticket, disappearing into the rhythm of her routine. Orders up, plates out, ice machine refilled. Just keep moving. But booth 3 wasn't finished. Each time she passed, one of them spoke just loud enough for her to hear. "She acting tough, but look at that arm. Bet her man don't even ask questions. You see that mark under it? What is that gang thing?" She ignored it all, the same way she'd ignored stares at the grocery store, whispers at gas stations, and the way children sometimes pointed before their parents hushed them. She was accustomed to being misunderstood. A scarred black woman in a small southern diner, there would always be stories invented before she even spoke a word. But today the heat wasn't the only unbearable thing. It was the way they laughed, as if she wasn't standing there, as if she wasn't real, as if her pain was merely amusing filler between burgers and beer talk. So she kept moving. Table 4 needed ranch. The elderly couple in the corner wanted their checks split. The girl bussing tables had dropped a glass, and the manager was nowhere to be found. So Tiana swallowed the rising fire in her chest and remained silent. But someone else did not. "You boys see a battlefield or just playgrounds?" The voice came from the counter, deep, calm, carrying the weight of someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. None of them knew yet that this stranger was about to change everything. The 4 men at booth 3 fell silent for a second, not out of respect, but because they weren't sure if the voice was directed at them. The man at the counter turned slowly on his stool, as if his decision was already made and he was simply giving them time to catch up. He was older, mid-60s perhaps, with silver-gray stubble along his jaw and skin like leather, baked and creased by years in the sun. His khaki shirt bore salt stains near the collar, and his forearms, lean but corded with muscle, rested casually beside his half-empty black coffee. No one in the diner knew his name yet, but he sat like a man unafraid of anything, like someone who had witnessed worse than 4 roughnecks with crude jokes and cheap laughs. The blonde man at the booth leaned back, one arm draped over the top of his seat. "You say something, old man?" The older guy sipped his coffee, then set the mug down. His voice was cool, even as if rehearsed. "I said, you boys ever been to a battlefield or just playgrounds?" One of the men scoffed, but none answered. Not yet. Tiana had frozen mid-step behind the counter, holding a tray with 2 club sandwiches. She wasn't breathing, or if she was, it was so shallow she barely felt it. The older man, Frank Delaney, though no one knew his name yet, shifted his eyes toward her left arm. Then he said in a tone of curiosity, not judgment, "Is that a Fire Horse 7 tattoo?" Tiana blinked. It had been years since anyone outside the military had recognized it. A simple black insignia, now faded under scar tissue. Most people just saw an old mark, something tribal or criminal. She'd stopped explaining a long time ago. But he didn't wait for her to answer. He rolled up his own sleeve and there it was. The same unit tattoo, the same insignia, a little blurrier, faded with time and sun, but plain as day. Tiana set the tray down, her hands unsteady, her throat dry. He gave her a small nod, not a greeting but an acknowledgement. "I see you. You were there." "You were there?" she asked softly. "Yeah," Frank replied. "Kandahar, summer of 19. You same." Now it was the roofers who looked confused. "What's Fire Horse 7? One of them asked. Frank turned slowly, placing both elbows on the counter behind him. His expression didn't change, but his voice dropped, becoming more direct. Fire Horse 7 was a convoy unit. 18 soldiers, 5 Humvees. We got ambushed on Route BO near an abandoned fuel depot. That ring a bell, miss?" Tiana gave the slightest nod. IED was under the 3rd vehicle. Frank pointed at her with one finger, not in accusation but in recognition. "She was in that vehicle. I wasn't. I was 3 cars behind in the 5th. But I saw what she did." He looked at each man at the booth, one by one. She pulled Sergeant Downey and Corporal Vicks out of a burning Humvee while her left arm was literally on fire. You ever tried dragging 180 pounds of dead weight while you're on fire? The men exchanged glances. Nothing clever came out. Frank continued. She passed out 10 feet from the rear bumper. Smoke inhalation, shrapnel wounds, fractured ribs. Still managed to save 3 people. The diner was completely silent now. The sound of the fryer, a spoon clinking inside a coffee cup. That was it. Frank turned to Tiana again. "I never forgot that day. Or the people who made it out because somebody else didn't freeze." She lowered her eyes. The heat in her face wasn't from the kitchen anymore. Frank sipped his coffee again and nodded toward the booth. "You all done laughing?" The blonde guy looked at the napkin dispenser, then the edge of the table as if it held the answer. He cleared his throat but didn't speak. "Didn't think so," Frank said. Behind the counter, Benny watched without a word. The hostess, barely 19, froze by the soda machine. Nobody moved. Tiana turned, walked back into the kitchen and stood still for a long second just behind the line. She pressed her fingers to her temples. She wasn't used to someone speaking for her, not like that. But what hit her harder was that someone had remembered what she'd tried so hard to forget. The clang of a metal spatula hitting the griddle brought Tiana back to the moment. Benny glanced over at her from behind the grill but didn't ask anything this time. He saw the look in her eyes and knew whatever was going on didn't need his opinion. She took a breath, just one, then grabbed the next 2 orders and stepped back into the dining room. Booth 3 had fallen silent. Frank Delaney hadn't moved. He sat calmly at the counter, watching the last of his coffee cool in the mug. The men in the booth were hunched now, picking at their fries, saying nothing. The loudest one, the blonde with the smirk, was the only one still trying to act normal, but his foot bounced under the table, fast and agitated. Tiana placed the club sandwiches at table 5 and kept moving, kept breathing. Then something unexpected happened. Frank called out to her. "Hey, Baines." She turned around slowly. "Mind if I tell him the whole thing? I figure if they're gonna laugh at scars, they might as well know what they're laughing at." Her lips pressed into a line, but she didn't say no. She didn't say yes either, but the pause was enough. Frank turned his body fully toward the 4 men. His voice didn't rise, he didn't need to perform. The calm made it heavier. It was July 19th. We were a few weeks from being rotated out. Everyone was trying not to get complacent. That's when bad things happen, when you stop thinking anything bad's left. He glanced down at his hands, then continued. Route BO had been cleared 3 days before, supposedly. But that morning, 2nd Humvee call sign Red 2 hit the pressure plate. Whole thing lit up like someone dropped a match in a gas tank. He paused. 3 gone instantly, Jackson, Lim and Dawson. Tiana was in red 3 behind them. Most people freeze when they see something like that. She didn't. Frank looked toward her again but didn't linger. She was out of the vehicle before the others had unbuckled. Fire was already catching. Tires exploded. Ammunition was cooking off. Smoke so thick you could taste it. She ran through it like it wasn't there. Pulled 2 out. The medic Burgess was the 3rd. That's who she lost part of that arm for. The men in the booth didn't say a word. Frank reached into his wallet and pulled out something. An old photo, folded, worn edges torn. He held it up for them to see. It showed 5 soldiers in front of a camo-wrapped Humvee, arms slung around each other, smiles too wide for the desert heat. That's her, he said, tapping the corner, second from the left. Tiana looked away. Frank folded the picture and put it back. I only show that to people who think they know what pain looks like. Most of you don't. The guy sitting closest to the wall cleared his throat. Man, we didn't mean any disrespect. Frank's stare didn't break. Yeah, you did. The guy's face twitched as if he might argue, but he didn't. He sat back down. Frank turned back to his coffee. It costs $0 to keep your mouth shut when you don't know what you're talking about. Behind him, someone whispered, Amen. The hush in the diner didn't lift for a while. Even the usual hum of conversation seemed to recede, giving space. Tiana walked over to the coffee pot not because she needed to but because it gave her a task. She poured a fresh cup and slid it in front of Frank. On the house, she said, her voice a little tight but steady. He gave her a look of appreciation. You still in? She shook her head. Out since 20. Medical discharge. Thought so. You carry yourself like someone who's done carrying. She managed the faintest smile at that, small, fleeting. Frank sipped the new cup. I meant what I said. A lot of us never forgot what you did that day. I know Burgess didn't. Her smile dropped. He made it. Lung damage, but yeah. Works in DC now. Admin stuff. Keeps a picture of you on his desk, or so I heard. That nearly broke her composure. She swallowed hard and turned away before anyone noticed the sting behind her eyes. But in that moment something began to shift, not outside but deep in her own mind. Tiana didn't cry, not then, not in front of customers, not in the middle of a shift, not when she could still smell hot grease and vinegar from the coleslaw tray. She just stayed in motion, hands wiping counters, resetting silverware, wiping the rim of a chipped ketchup bottle, like nothing had changed. But everything had. The atmosphere inside Willow's Grill was no longer buzzing with casual chatter. Conversations had dropped to a murmur, and even the fry cook had turned down the country station playing in the back. The roofers at booth 3 were still sitting there, but none of them had touched their food. It sat going cold, fries limp, burgers untouched. Every so often one of them would glance over at Tiana as she passed by, then quickly look away. The loud one, the blonde guy, sunglasses back on his head, finally pushed his plate away like it had gone sour. Frank was still sipping his coffee at the counter, watching the street through the front window now. He didn't say another word. He didn't need to. A few tables cleared out. Nobody made a fuss. But you could feel the quiet shift of energy, like something had been put back in place, even if it made people uncomfortable to admit it. When Tiana brought their check to booth 3, she didn't look at them. It's all there, she said, placing the receipt face down on the table with 2 fingers. She turned to walk away, but one of them, shorter, bearded, the one who hadn't said anything earlier, spoke. Miss, we didn't know. He paused just a second. You didn't ask. He nodded once, swallowed hard, and didn't say anything else. They paid in cash, crumpled bills, a couple of 20s, some small bills folded unevenly. But beneath the pile was a clean napkin, one of the good ones, not the paper-thin ones from the dispenser. They'd written something in thick blue ink from one of the waitress pens. We're sorry. We were way out of line. Respect. And underneath the note, folded discreetly, was a $100 bill. Tiana stared at it for a second longer than she meant to. She wasn't sure what bothered her more, that it came from guilt, or that it had taken Frank Delaney's voice to make them see her. Still, she pocketed the cash without a word, not because she needed their money, but because it meant they finally saw something they hadn't seen before. Maybe just for a second, but sometimes that's enough. The rest of the shift moved slowly. Afternoon regulars came in. 2 truckers from the highway, a woman and her toddler, an elderly man who ordered the same tuna sandwich every Thursday. Life didn't stop because of moments. It never did. When the clock hit 3 o'clock, Tiana clocked out. Her shirt was damp with sweat, and the thin layer of foundation she wore had given up around lunchtime. She peeled off her apron in the back, hung it up behind the door, and grabbed her backpack from under the shelf. As she walked out, Frank was standing just outside the front door, arms crossed, waiting like someone with no particular place to be. "You get off now?" he asked. "Yeah. Want a lift? It's too damn hot to be walking." He thought about it. She had a ride coming, her cousin who was always 10 minutes late. But Frank's offer didn't feel invasive. It felt gentle. "Thanks, but I'm good. Appreciate it though." He nodded, then reached into his back pocket and pulled out a business card. Simple print, no logo, just his name, a number, and 3 words beneath it. VFW Post 1739 Salisbury, NC. He held it out. "We have meetings Wednesdays. Usually just coffee, complaints, and half-decent stories. If you ever want to come by." He took it. "Maybe," she said, barely above a whisper. Frank tapped the brim of his cap and walked off down the street, slow but steady, like a man who knew exactly how long it would take to get where he was going. Tiana stood there for a moment, card in hand, unsure why her legs suddenly felt like sand. She looked down at her arm, the scars, the tattoo, the fading border around the ink, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like something she needed to hide. But the real question wasn't what others saw. It was what she was willing to see in herself. Tiana's apartment sat above an old laundromat on Brookline Avenue, about 3 blocks from the diner. The rent was cheap and the floor creaked when she walked across it, but it was hers. The only decorations were framed photos from before Kandahar, a plant she never remembered to water, and a couch that used to belong to her aunt. She kicked off her sneakers by the door and dropped her bag next to the armchair. The card from Frank was still in her pocket. She took it out, stared at it again, then stuck it to the fridge with a dull magnet from a local pizza place. The space was quiet, too quiet sometimes. Sometimes that helped, sometimes it didn't. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. Her arms still stung from the heat. The roll of her sleeves had left creases against the old scar tissue, but she didn't care. Let them show. A knock on the door broke the silence. 3 soft taps, then a pause. She opened it without asking who it was. Only one person ever visited without texting first. "Girl," said Raina Elkins, stepping inside with a grocery bag on her arm. "I brought you that honey lemon tea you like, and I swear if you haven't cleaned out your fridge since last week, I'm throwing away that container myself." Tiana smiled faintly. "Hey." Raina looked at her for a second longer than usual, then raised an eyebrow. "You good?" "I'm fine, yeah. You always say that, but you've got that post-shift stare again. That I had to swallow glass for 6 hours look." Tiana turned back toward the kitchen. "Some guys were laughing at my arm today." Raina's smile dropped. Again. "They didn't know. I don't care if they thought it came from a dragon bite. You don't laugh at people's pain." Tiana shrugged. "Someone said something. Shut them down hard." Raina walked over to her, reached for her wrist gently, and looked at the faded ink beneath the scar. "Was it someone from the unit?" "Yeah. Old guy. Said he was there. Showed the same tape. Fire Horse 7. What's his name?" "Frank Delaney." Raina's eyes widened slightly. "Wait, you mean Sarge Delaney? I remember hearing about him. Ran logistics, right? That dude was a ghost, always 2 steps ahead, like spooky accurate." "Yeah, that's him. He gave me his card. VFW Hall in Salisbury." "You gonna go?" Tiana didn't answer right away. She poured another glass of water and sat down on the couch. Raina joined her, kicking her shoes off, curling her legs under her. "I don't know," Tiana finally said. "Part of me feels like I don't know, like it's too far behind me. And part of me feels like I never left." Raina didn't speak for a few seconds. Then she leaned forward, her voice softer. "Do you ever talk about it? Like really talk?" "No." "Why not?" "Because it doesn't fix anything." Raina reached into the grocery bag and pulled out the tea. She walked over, set the box gently on the counter, then came back and sat again. "It doesn't have to fix it. But maybe it helps put it somewhere." They sat in silence after that. Tiana looked at her arm again. The shape of the scar had changed over time. It wasn't as red, wasn't as raised, but it never vanished. It was still there, etched into her skin like a map she hadn't asked for. That night she took a shower, let the hot water run over her shoulders until it turned lukewarm, then cold. She stepped out, dried off, and looked at herself in the mirror. She touched the tattoo gently with 2 fingers. Maybe it was time to stop pretending it wasn't a part of her. She grabbed the card from the fridge and placed it by her keys. She hadn't said yes to anything yet, but she didn't throw it away either. Wednesday afternoon rolled around faster than Tiana expected. She'd held the card in her hand 3 separate times that morning. Once after her shower, once while pouring cereal, and again when she stepped out to check the mailbox. Each time she stared at it like it might answer the question for her. Should I go? By 3:45 she was behind the wheel of her cousin's borrowed Honda Civic, driving north towards Salisbury. The windows were down, the radio off. The wind tangled in her hair, and the air outside smelled like heat and cut grass. She parked across the street from a beige building that looked more like an old post office than anything military-related. The sign on the window read VFW Post 1739, in faded black letters, and beneath it, taped in uneven script, Veterans Welcome. Wednesdays 4 p.m. She sat in the car for 5 full minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel like it might steady her. Then she got out. Inside, the space was simple. Linoleum floors, plastic chairs, a scratched-up pool table in the corner. A row of American flags lined one wall, and above the counter was a corkboard full of photos. Faces frozen in grainy snapshots, some in uniform, some in wheelchairs, all in moments that once mattered. A few older men and women were gathered near a long table with paper cups and a tray of cookies. The smell of coffee and lemon-scented floor cleaner mixed strangely in the air. Frank Delaney spotted her before she could speak. "Look what the storm blew in," he said, walking toward her with a grin that wasn't mocking. It was warm, familiar. "You made it." Tiana gave a small shrug. "Didn't have anything better to do." "That's a lie, but I'll take it." He motioned for her to follow. "Come on, you're hungry." They got peanut butter cookies, but don't eat the oatmeal. Briggs made those, and I think he put sadness in them. Tiana let out the smallest laugh, and it felt good. Not big, not loud, but honest. A woman in her 50s approached, short hair, long denim jacket, and a face that said she'd buried too many friends. "I'm Elsie," she said, extending her hand. "You're the one Frank's been going on about." "He talks too much," Tiana replied, shaking her hand. "He earned that right. So did you." Another man introduced himself, then another. Nobody asked about her scars. Nobody stared at the tech. And slowly she felt her muscles unclench, like she'd been bracing herself against something that never hit. About 30 minutes in, someone suggested they go around and say something real, which, as Frank explained, just meant telling a memory they never talked about anywhere else. Elsie spoke first about a convoy in Fallujah, a sandstorm that stranded her for 16 hours, and how the silence afterward haunted her more than the firefight. Then a man named Tony, who lost his hearing in one ear after an RPG hit the back wall of a school they'd secured. He joked about it like it was a TV rerun, but his eyes gave it away. When it was Tiana's turn, she hesitated. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Frank didn't push. She took a breath. "I don't usually talk," she said quietly. "Not about this." Nobody interrupted. Nobody rushed her. "I remember crawling into the fire, not through it, into it. I remember the seat melting under me and someone yelling, but it was muffled. I don't remember dragging Burgess out. I just remember the heat and the way his hand wouldn't let go of mine." Her voice cracked slightly. She didn't stop. "I remember thinking, I'm not gonna die here, not like this. But I also remember thinking, maybe it wouldn't be so bad if I did. And that thought scared me more than the flames." Silence. Then someone across the room whispered, "I know that feeling." Tiana looked up, and for the first time since leaving Afghanistan, she didn't feel like the only one in the room carrying something she couldn't name. Frank handed her a cup of coffee without a word. She took it with steady hands, and in that quiet room filled with strangers, Tiana realized she wasn't as alone as she'd taught herself to believe. By the following week, something strange had started happening at Willow's Grill. It wasn't big, not at first, just a shift in how people looked at Tiana. Not with pity, but with pause. Some leaned in a little closer when she spoke. Some lowered their voices when she passed, as if loud talk didn't feel right anymore. The story had gotten out, not through Tiana, not even through Frank directly, but Salisbury wasn't a big city and stories like that never stayed put. Someone at the VFW had mentioned her name to a friend. That friend had a cousin who worked in town. By the weekend, the contractors from Booth 3 weren't just apologizing in whispers. They were keeping their heads down and tipping extra every time they came in. One afternoon, a regular named Mr. Penley, a retired school principal who always ordered chicken salad on wheat, looked up as she refilled his coffee. "You served?" he asked. Tiana hesitated. "Yeah." "What branch?" "Army." He gave a respectful nod and didn't say anything else. Another time, a woman with 2 kids stopped her at the register. "My brother was in Kandahar too. He didn't make it back. I just wanted to say thank you." Tiana didn't know how to respond, so she nodded once quietly and handed the woman her change. She didn't want to be the center of attention. That wasn't her. But something had shifted in how the town saw her, not just as the waitress with the scar, but someone who had carried more than a tray and still showed up every day like it was nothing. Raina noticed it too. "Girl, you're like a local legend now," she said one night over dinner. "They've gone from side-eyeing your arm to practically saluting you." Tiana rolled her eyes. "It's weird. It's overdue, but it's not real. They didn't care until someone else made them care." "Maybe. But respect that's late is still respect. Sometimes folks need help recognizing what's been right in front of them." Frank stopped by the diner that Thursday. He sat at the counter again, ordered a black coffee and a plate of hash browns with hot sauce, and didn't say much at first. But before he left, he handed her a flyer. "Veterans breakfast next Saturday. I think people would like to hear your story." She sighed. "I don't know if I'm ready to be that person." Frank tilted his head slightly. "Which person?" "The one standing in front of a crowd sharing things I barely talk about with myself." He took a slow sip of his coffee and said, "You don't have to be polished. Just real. People remember real." She folded the flyer and tucked it into her apron. "I'll think about it." As the week rolled on, the tone inside the diner kept evolving. One afternoon, she caught a group of teens at the corner table passing around a phone. They weren't loud, but they kept glancing at her. One girl, maybe 16, finally stood up and walked over. "Excuse me," she said, holding her phone. "Is this you?" The video on the screen was grainy, shot at the VFW. Tiana was sitting at a folding table, coffee in front of her, telling part of her story. Someone must have recorded it, she hadn't noticed. Tiana looked at the screen, then at the girl. "Yeah, that's me. My uncle's in the army. He told me about Fire Horse 7. He said you're brave." Tiana gave a faint smile. "Tell your uncle to stay safe." The girl nodded, turned and hurried back to her friends. Tiana went back to pouring tea, but her mind stayed stuck for a moment on that word. Brave. It wasn't how she saw herself. She saw decisions made in the middle of chaos. She saw burned cream, months of recovery, silence at home, restless nights. But maybe brave wasn't about how she felt. Maybe it was about the choice to keep going. Maybe showing up even when no one noticed counted too. But just when she thought she understood what the town now saw in her, someone younger would ask a question that hit her even harder. It was a slow Monday afternoon. The lunch crowd had thinned to a handful of regulars sipping coffee and reading papers. A ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, doing little to fight the heat, but no one really complained anymore. Folks had gotten used to the quiet pace of the diner and to Tiana Baines moving from table to table with her even steps and focused face. The bell above the door jingled. A woman in her early 30s walked in, holding the hand of a little girl who looked no older than 7. The girl had thick pigtails, white sandals, and an oversized Hello Kitty backpack that bounced with every step. Tiana greeted them with the same small, practiced smile she gave everyone. "Sit wherever you like." They slid into the booth near the front window. Tiana brought them 2 menus and a glass of water. As she was about to turn away, the little girl looked up, eyes wide and curious, like kids always were, and pointed gently at Tiana's left arm. "What happened to your skin?" Her voice was soft, not rude, not mocking, just honest. The mother's eyes widened, horror on her face. "Brielle." But Tiana held up a hand. "It's okay." She looked at the girl and knelt down beside the booth, resting one elbow on the table so the girl could see. "These are burn scars," Tiana said. "I got them a few years ago." The little girl's eyes narrowed, thinking. "Did it hurt?" Tiana gave a small nod. "Yeah, a lot." "Did you cry?" Tiana looked away for a second, then back. "I didn't at first. But later, yeah, I did." The girl didn't laugh or flinch. He just kept staring, absorbing. "Did someone do it to you?" Her mom's face turned a shade of red, clearly unsure whether to apologize again or leave. Tiana shook her head slowly. No. It happened when I was trying to help someone. There was a fire and I went into it to get them out. The girl blinked. You went into a fire? Yeah. Why? Tiana smiled gently. Because they needed me. The little girl paused, then she reached out, small fingers brushing just below the edge of Tiana's tattoo. Is that a picture? It's a mark, Tiana said. It shows where I used to work. A group of people like a team. We all had the same mark. The girl studied it for another second. Are they still your team? That one hit her differently. Tiana opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at the girl's mother who just watched, quiet, grateful, maybe even relieved that her daughter wasn't being silenced, just answered. I think they always will be, Tiana finally said. Even if we don't see each other much anymore. The girl smiled. That's cool. Then as easily as she'd asked, she returned to her coloring book. No judgment, no awkwardness, just a moment of truth accepted and absorbed like any other fact of life. As Tiana stood and walked back to the counter, something settled in her chest, not heavy, not painful. Settled. It was different when kids asked. They weren't looking to make sense of your story, to judge it. They were just trying to understand their world. And in that booth, with her pink backpack and her plain questions, Brielle had given Tiana something no adult had. Permission to own the story. Raina came in later that day and noticed her expression right away. You look like someone just bought your coffee and told you your scars are trending. Tiana chuckled. A little girl asked me about my arm today. Yikes. What did she say? Everything adults are too afraid to. Raina sat at the counter, kicked off her sandals and stole a French fry from a nearby basket. You handle it okay? I think I handled it better than her mom. They both laughed, and for the first time in a while the laughter didn't feel like a mask. It felt earned. That night, Tiana looked through the top drawer of her nightstand and found an old photo from Kandahar. It was one of the few she hadn't burned. 5 faces, dusty uniforms, sunlight bouncing off a helmet. Hers in the middle, smirking slightly, her left hand bandaged and slung across her chest. She held it in her hands for a long time, then she placed it gently in a frame. Because sometimes it takes a child's question to remind you that your pain isn't something to hide. It's something you survived. The next Saturday, Tiana found herself back at VFW Post 1739, not because she had promised anyone, but because something had shifted inside her. A quiet need to reconnect, not with the past exactly, but with the part of herself that still lived in it. This time she didn't hesitate in the car. She walked straight in, holding a tray of store-bought blueberry muffins. She placed them down near the coffee station and gave a small nod to Elsie, who was already setting up. Frank arrived a few minutes later, wearing the same worn khaki shirt and carrying a plastic container of egg salad that nobody ever touched but everyone respected. Brought muffins? He asked, grinning. I owed you one. Frank poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down beside her. You know, you don't have to keep showing up just to please us. I know, she said. But I'm not showing up for you. He gave her a look, quiet approval, nothing flashy. Then he pulled something out of his pocket, a folded piece of cloth. Figured I'd give you this, he said. It was a patch, dark green, embroidered with a black horse and flame. Fire Horse 7. This yours? It was. Figured you've earned it more than I have. She turned it over in her hands. It was heavier than it looked. You carry it around every day? He replied. Not because I need to, but because it reminds me who I've been. Tiana didn't speak right away. Frank went on, everyone carries something. A name, a scar, a face, a memory. Some of us bury it, pretend it's not there. Others drag it around so long it starts dragging them. But then there are people like you who learn to walk with it. She blinked hard. Her throat tightened, but she swallowed it down. I'm not sure I've learned that yet. You're here, aren't you? She nodded. Yeah. That's a start. Later that morning, during the group check-in, Elsie asked if anyone had something they wanted to share. For once, Tiana didn't wait to be asked twice. I had someone ask me this week, she said slowly, if the people I served with are still my team. The room quieted. I said yes. I still think that's true. But I've also realized something else. I've been trying so hard to carry everything on my own like it was some kind of punishment. Like because I made it out I had to pay for it. A few heads nodded, solemn and slow. I don't want to carry it like that anymore. I want it to mean something. Elsie smiled. That's the trick, isn't it? letting it be something more than weight. Frank raised his coffee. I'll drink to that. After the meeting, as they all stood around sharing small talk and warm cookies, Tiana caught herself laughing at something dumb one of the old vets said. A laugh that didn't feel practiced, didn't feel guarded. It just came out. On the drive home she rolled the windows down again. The wind rushed in like it had something to say. She didn't turn on the radio, she didn't need the noise. The quiet didn't scare her as much anymore. Back at the apartment she placed the Firehorse 7 patch on her dresser beside the framed photo she'd dug out the week before. She sat on the edge of the bed, stared at both for a long while, and whispered something only the walls could hear. Still standing. That evening Frank sent her a message. Keep showing up. Doesn't have to be for us. Just for you. She typed back, I think I finally get that. And she meant it. But before she could fully step into what that meant, there was still one more decision she had to make. The next Friday the forecast warned of near record-breaking heat. 95 degrees in the shade and humidity thick enough to feel like a second shirt. Tiana stood in front of her small bedroom mirror at 6 a.m., already dressed for work. Only this time something was different. Her sleeves weren't rolled up, they were gone entirely. She'd chosen a short-sleeved blouse, neat, clean, the same light blue color as before, but no more covering up. Her left arm was fully exposed. The scarred tissue, the tattoo, even the spot above her wrist where the skin looked melted and uneven, all of it in plain sight. She didn't wear makeup to dull the tone of her skin or distract from the texture. She didn't angle her body in the mirror to find a better look. She just stood there breathing. No fanfare, no speech, just a quiet choice not to hide anymore. When she walked into Willow's grill, the usual morning clatter filled the air. Coffee brewing, cutlery clinking, chairs scraping across tile. But one thing cut through the noise. Silence. When people noticed her, it wasn't cruel, it wasn't mocking. It was surprise. Benny the cook gave her a double take when she stepped into the back room, then he gave her a slow, silent thumbs up before turning back to the griddle. Midway through her shift, the man from booth 6, Mr. Penley, looked at her arm and said simply, "Good for you." Later, a teenager at the counter gave her an awkward smile and said, "That tattoo's pretty cool." Even the contractors from the roofing crew came in that afternoon. They didn't say much, just left a tip and a look that hovered somewhere between apology and respect. It was subtle, no dramatic music, no crowd applause, just a shift, a steady one. Tiana moved through the diner like she always had, efficient, calm, focused. But there was a lightness now in her step, in the way her shoulders didn't round forward anymore, in how she met people's eyes. By 2:30 the lunch rush slowed. She poured herself a glass of water, stepped outside the back door for some air, and let the sun hit her bare arms. It felt different than before. Less like exposure, more like something earned. Her phone buzzed, a text from Frank. "Got your picture from Elsie. Looks like freedom." She smiled. She typed back, "Feels like it." Then she added almost without thinking, "I'm gonna speak next month. Tell the full story. I'm ready." Frank's reply came instantly, "You already have been." She leaned against the brick wall behind the diner, arms crossed, not to hide but to feel the sun on her skin. The scars weren't going anywhere. The past wasn't vanishing. But she wasn't waiting for it to. Tiana knew now that bravery didn't always look like rushing into fire. Sometimes it looked like showing up day after day, telling the truth when it would be easier to lie, wearing the marks life left on you without apology. Later that evening she passed by the framed photo on her dresser, the one from Kandahar. She didn't stop to stare. She didn't touch it like it might break. She just saw it, acknowledged it, and kept walking. Because she had tomorrow's schedule in her bag, muffins in the fridge, and a speech to start writing. If you're listening to this right now, maybe there's something in your life you've been hiding, something you've convinced yourself you have to carry alone. Let this story remind you, you don't have to. There's strength in showing up, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be seen. Subscribe for more stories that matter. Real people, real moments, real choices.